Thank you. My name is Clint. I'm alcoholic. And I'm glad to be here. I'd like to thank the committee, Dick and the people responsible for asking Pat and I to come out. Sometimes we get running around and she goes one direction and I go another, and we don't get to spend all that many weekends together, and it's been a great treat for us to be together this weekend, and we're most grateful that you made that possible. I'm just a drunk. I had my last drink on the 14th of August, 1966, and that's a miracle, and that miracle is due to this program and due to the love of the people in it, due to the power of this fellowship. I like the theme of your conference this year. It works. It really does. There is no question but what it does. And so I'm delighted to be here because I love AA. I love being sober. I love having the opportunity to be a part of this, as Tom said, this celebration of life. And that's just what it is. Let me get before I get too carried away, is there any problem with the sound system here? Everybody hear me? Okay, all right. Thank you. I always get a little bit jumpy and nervous about participating in these things. I thought I was pretty cool and calm about it this time. I was with Pat and we had fun last night. Are you in that room next to ours there? God, I laughed. We came out of the hotel after the meeting last night, and we were kind of fooling around, and we jumped into a cab. And I said, take us to the nearest 31 Flavors right away. He looked smitten. He didn't know quite how to handle that. I said, when does it close? And he said, I don't know, it may be closed. And I said, hurry, God damn it, man, hurry. There's an extra 5 in it for you if you can get us there on time. We got there on time, and we went in and got a thing, came back. I said, wait here. And we came back out in the cab, Pat and me, we're laughing and having a big time. And I said, if anybody happens to ask you, it doesn't close till 11 o'clock here. The Baskin-Robbins 31 Flavors ice cream place in Bossier City closes at 11 o'clock on weekends. And I don't believe that comes up real often with him. But we had some fun, and we've had fun since we got here. I dreamed last night, and it made me realize when I remembered the dream this morning how that I was nervous about participating here. I don't often remember my dreams. I guess I dream like everybody. I don't remember them, but I remembered this one. It was kind of an odd, they're never very realistic. This one seemed to have, I was standing at the edge of heaven. And I was looking in. And it was cloudy and misty and all that in there. And I was talking to some authority figure in this dream, St. Pete or somebody, I don't know who it was. And I saw a figure come across there that looked vaguely familiar. And I said, who is that? And this St. Pete said, that's Tom O'Sullivan. I said, really? Who is that? What is that with him? And he was shackled to some ugly-looking thing, about 400 pounds, a just awful-looking mess. And I said, what is that? And they said, well, Tom damn near didn't make it up here, and instead of sending him down there, they let him come up here, but for 5,000 years you got to wander around with that thing strapped to him like that. And I thought, oh, that's bad. And then coming from over this way, I saw a figure and it looked familiar. I said, that's Mary Jane. He said, yeah, that's right. And she was strapped to some nasty-looking thing with big warts and wine sores all over it. And I said, that seems odd. Why would that be like that? And I was told that Mary Jane damn near didn't make it up here, and instead of sending her down below, they let her stay up here, but for 10,000 years she got to walk around shackled to that mess. And I thought, that's terrible. And then coming through the mist was a figure, a guy that I know and love, Dick H. And I looked again, and I recognized, I said, yeah, that's right, that's Dick. And I said, he's walking, that's Raquel Welsh. And they said, that's right. And I said, well, how? And he strapped to her. Yeah, that's right. I said, he's a nice guy, but Tom with that ugly thing and Mary Jane with that mess, and now how come it is that Dick is strapped to Raquel Welsh like that? And Pete said, Raquel damn near didn't make it up here. I've had more laughs since I have been a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous than I ever did before in my life. When I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I was living in Glendale, California in a garage with 3 other guys, and life was not good. It was a double garage, and life still wasn't that good. You know what I mean? It was a garage that had been cut up into 4 rooms, and I had one of those rooms. It had linoleum on the floor and a little narrow cot in there and a light that came out of the ceiling, and there was a sink, and there was a mirror, and there was a wardrobe. And a little chest of drawers, and I lived and died in that room about every day. Sometimes I didn't wake up there. Sometimes I woke up in jail or in the car. Waking up in jail was not a very pleasant thing, but in a way it was easier than waking up in that room. Because you know that when you wake up in the room, you're afraid you might get arrested. You do not have that fear when you wake up in jail. When you wake up in that room, you think you need to get out and get a drink as soon as you can. And when you wake up in jail, and as soon as you realize where you are, you know that you're not going to get out and go get a drink that day. And something about knowing that you're not going to go out and get a drink that day makes the need to get a drink diminish just a little bit. And I look at those guys, and I knew I was in trouble with drinking. I mean, that was just the way of it. But I wasn't alcoholic. The guy in the next cell was alcoholic. You could tell by looking at him that he was alcoholic. I am not alcoholic. I'm too young. I was 29, and I had a college education. I'd served for 3 years as an officer in the United States Marine Corps. I'd gone to dental school for 2 years before they threw me out. Source of comfort to a lot of people at the dental school that year that were patients there when they threw me out. And I can't be alcoholic. I've always known I can't be alcoholic. I'm not real sure what an alcoholic is, but I can't be alcoholic. An alcoholic is somebody that's living on Skid Row with chili on his chest and an overcoat and a beard and about 3 days older than a tree. And somebody that is different than me. And I can't be alcoholic. And there I was living in that garage. And on the days that I woke up there, I didn't always wake up at dawn or at 8 or at 10 or in broad daylight. I often woke up at pitch dark. One night, I had a window in that little room that opened out onto what had been the driveway, and somebody pulled into that driveway one night at 2 or 3 in the morning. and their lights from the car flashed through the window and onto the wall, and I was in there. And I went under the bed, filled with terror because they were there. I don't know who they were, but whoever it is that comes after guys like me at 3 a.m. had arrived. And I lay under that bed on that sticky linoleum floor for a long time that night. One night I woke up under that bed, and there was a rat over in the corner looking at me. And I was scared all the time in those days anyway, and that rat made me real nervous because I knew that I was defenseless. I knew that I couldn't get away from that thing. If he decided to go after me, I would have been very vulnerable. I just kind of began to know that if I moved, he would take a bite out of my face. And I lay there for a long time and stared at that rat. And the sun began to come up. And first light in that room revealed an interesting thing. That was a pair of socks over there in that corner. One night I woke up in that little room, and the 3 guys that lived there in that garage, I'd never seen them. I didn't see them. I heard them once in a while. One of us would wake up in the morning and start to vomit, and the rest would join in like a choir. There was a camaraderie there you don't find everywhere. But there they were in my room that night, and I didn't know how they'd gotten in there. I thought maybe I'd left the door unlocked, or I had left it ajar, or they'd forced it somehow. Or pulled the wall apart. It was a flimsy building. And I woke up, and there they were. And I don't remember making a sound. I stood up. And I got up, and I got hit, and I went down again. And that seemed to go on for quite a while. I would think they would have gone, and I would get up, and I would discover the hard way that they were still there. And I got very frightened. I didn't get angry. I got scared. Because I'm defenseless. Because I know that I have done something to warrant that kind of treatment. And when I woke up, it was light, and they were gone. And I dragged myself to my feet, and I looked in that mirror, and I'd been cut up pretty good. And I didn't call the police. I didn't go out after those guys. I didn't make any effort to set that to rights. It was just another event in my life that I swept under the rug and didn't do anything about. And some years went by, and I was sitting in a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous one night. And a woman who has since become a friend of mine was talking, a lady by the name of Jerry, and she was telling a story that had an odd fascination for me, the story of her stay at Bellevue Hospital in New York. She had been admitted into the flight deck there for alcoholism. And there wasn't any room in the wards for her, and so she'd been strapped down on a gurney all night long out in the hall. And she tried to get to sleep, and in fact, they'd given her some sedatives. But she couldn't get to sleep, and one of the reasons that she couldn't get to sleep, according to the story she was telling that night in the meeting, was that there was a woman down the hall that was screaming at the top of her lungs. And she knew that if they could just shut that woman up, she could get to sleep, and she would beg them as they came by. A nurse or an attendant or an orderly would come by, and she would say, "Shut that woman up down at the end of the hall," and I could get some sleep. And that went on all night, and about the end of the night, as the new shift was coming on, the attendant came down the hall again past this stretcher where Jerry had been restrained. And she started again to tell him to shut the woman up, and as she began to speak, she discovered that her voice was just a screech and her throat was raw. And in a sickening moment of clarity, she knew that it was she that had been screaming all that night. And as she told that story, I had a sickening moment of clarity all my own. I knew that I had been alone in that garage all that night. I knew that. I had come to the next morning and the door was locked from the inside, and I had looked in the corners where the walls came together for cracks in the paint, thinking they had gotten in that way, pulled the wall apart. And I didn't see any cracks in the paint, and there wasn't any way they could have gotten in there. And I had been alone. I had gotten up out of bed, and I had stumbled, and I had cut my face against the sink or against the edge of the bed or against the drawer. I don't know what, but I had gotten up and fallen, and gotten up and fallen. And in my insanity, I created 3 assailants. In my insanity, I imagined that I was being beaten to death by 3 silent attackers. And that's not the result of social drinking. And I don't want to live like that anymore. And so I have a great, great sense of gratitude for what has happened to me since I've been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. Once you've been lost, as somebody said one night, once you've been really lost, you never get over the wonder of being found again. And I was a lost pup when I came here. I was a drunk. I was nuts. I didn't have any way to make it in the world. And the very best I could do was live in that garage and crawl around on that sticky linoleum floor, sell encyclopedias door to door when I could get out of bed and go to work. And stand in front of that judge in the Glendale Municipal Court on many an occasion. They'd line up there after the felony matters were taken care of, and those of us that had been gathered up in the night would just line up. And one by one our names would be called. And one by one we'd get up there in front of the bench, and the judge would say whatever the charge was and ask us, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty? And it was never really that clear to me. It seemed to me that there ought to be one more choice in there someplace, you know. Some guy said it, guilty with an explanation. I kind of like that. The judge never seemed to be that interested in the explanation. But I've got one of those backgrounds and temperaments that makes it almost obligatory that I feel guilty about 90% of the time. So if you ask me if I'm guilty or not guilty, on any given day I'll say I'm guilty. I've been guilty since I was about 4. I don't know what. I heard a gal in the meeting one night say she felt faintly responsible for World War II, and yeah, sure. We had one of those hellfire and brimstone upbringings. It wasn't Baptist, but it was like that. It was a fundamentalist, Bible-banging, evangelical church in Billings, Montana. Church of the Air. And there I learned a lot about guilt. That wasn't all they taught. They talked about love and faith and hope. But I didn't get it. I got the guilt. I just seemed to like guilt. And anything that was any fun at all, as was expressed earlier today, was a sin. They didn't dance in that church either. They didn't wear makeup. The women didn't wear makeup. The men didn't wear makeup either, but that wasn't a... In fact, somebody told me one night after meeting the reason that Baptists never, ever make love standing up is they don't want to be accused of dancing. And I think that's probably right, you know. It was a sin for us to do a great number of things. I remember taking a note from my mother to the teacher in 7th grade. So we didn't have to go to dancing class. I picked up a lot of that guilt as a kid. And so I'd stand in front of that judge in the Glendale Municipal Court, and he'd say, guilty or not guilty, and I never really knew what to say. I always felt guilty, but I never felt guilty of that charge. I mean, if it was drunk, I wasn't really drunk. Not what you'd call drunk. If I remembered the arrest, I didn't think I was drunk. I got arrested for drunk driving at 10 o'clock one morning in Glendale. And he wants to know if I plead guilty or not guilty. At 10 in the morning. Now, surely to God, anybody with any sense would know that a man can't be drunk at 10 in the morning. The light was red and I stopped. And the light turned green and amber and red, green, amber. I was resting. And pretty soon one of Glendale's finest in one of those cute blue outfits was rapping at the window. As I recall, he said, "Sir, that's the only shade of green we have here in California." Not guilty. I want a jury trial. I want justice. My sponsor has taught me not to cry for justice. I've had about all the justice I want. Mercy. Bad checks. They arrested me and brought me in there. Bad checks. I don't know how to plead on that. I mean, I never wanted any of those checks to bounce. The Marine Corps would give me some mustering out pay at the end of 1965, and I'd put it in the bank, and the bank would give me a bunch of blank checks. And I guess I thought it'd all come out even. Those checks lasted a little longer than the money did. I had a wealth of signatures that spring, as I recall. But if he'd taken it down right then, right that day, it might have gone through. Who knew? I hadn't subtracted since February, and you never knew. I hadn't opened a bank statement since then either. I haven't thought of that in a while. Boy, there was a clutter of unopened envelopes in that little place I lived. I didn't open anything because there wasn't any good news. Once in a while, I'd take a chance on a piece of junk mail, and that was it. Guilty or not guilty. And you make your deal, you set it for a jury trial, or you pay the fine, or you sit out your day or two or three in the slammer. And I was 29 years old, and I was living in a garage, and I was standing in front of the judge in the Glendale Municipal Court, and there wasn't any wife around, and the children were not around. I didn't have a job, really, and I couldn't go out and get one. And there wasn't any reason for any of it except one. I can't drink just a little bit. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that. I know I'm not alcoholic. And that was such a struggle for me. And if you're new here tonight and you know you're not an alcoholic, That is your choice and your right to make that decision. And we can make that come out any way we want to because we define alcoholism any way we need to. I defined it. I'd cross a line and I'd draw a line and I'd say on that side of the line is alcoholism. And when I'd cross that line, I would draw another line. It narrows after a while and you're left with the fact that the reason I know I'm not an alcoholic is because alcoholics don't care. I care. Therefore, I can't be alcoholic. And that'll go about as far as any of them will. And I had to take another look at it after I came here. Because the question doesn't come up. The question that comes up, at least with reference to the steps, comes up in the first step, and it talks in terms of whether I am powerless over alcohol. That's a little easier. It's a little more definitive. I know what powerless is. Powerless is not being able to get from the linoleum floor up to the bed. Powerless is having those three guys come in that room and being unable to do anything about it. Powerless is put your hands behind your back. Powerless is get in the car. I operated to their goals in those days, and they always set nice, clean, short-term goals that I could achieve. Put your chin up on that bar there and look right into the camera. I can do that. Practically a model citizen this morning. Take your thumb and let us roll it right. No, let us do the work. That's powerless is what that is. So I'm powerless over alcohol, and I knew that then, but I knew that that was different than being alcoholic. I don't know how I knew that, and I've come to know today that it is not different. But I can't drink just a little bit. That's critical. I always knew I could drink a lot, and I found out since I got here over 16 years ago that I do real well if I don't drink anything at all, but I can't drink just a little bit. And I always thought I should be able to drink just a little bit. I mean, guys that were dumber than me drank just a little bit. We'd go over to the officers' club after work at El Toro or at Camp Pendleton, and those guys would drink just a little bit. They'd have 2 drinks and they'd go home. And I'd be toasting the next crew at 11 o'clock that night that were coming in, throwing those little impromptu cocktail parties that... And I haven't wanted to drink just a little bit since I first drank. Now, I grew up in a home that had, in addition to that hellfire and brimstone, a drunken father. So he added his share of charm. He wasn't very big, but he was quick. God, he was fast. So you learn to be careful how you answered questions. And he had one that I never could answer. He had 2, really. One was, what do you want to do with your life? I don't know. I just want to be happy. And the other was, when are you going to be a man? I don't know. What time is it now? You know, I don't know when. I don't know what a man does. I didn't tell him this. I don't know what I told him. But whatever it was not to answer the question, but to placate him. And my mom had some of her own. Have you found God yet? No, I don't think so. Where are you going to spend eternity? Or she'd tell us where we were going to spend eternity. That is a colorful recitation. I mean, you're going to burn forever. I always thought I could handle 10,000 years, but forever. You know. What will you do when you meet your Maker? Well, I don't know. What do you do? I understand he's a little irked. And I'm not sure I want to meet him. And then she'd say, well, he holds you in the hollow of his hand. That may comfort her, but I always had a feeling that if he ever noticed me there, he'd give me one of those, you know. And as always, we heard about potential. You have so much potential. And I knew from an early age, I don't think I put it into words, but the idea was that I'm supposed to operate up here at this level. And I don't. I operate down here. And life's work is to clean up my act. And some days, you know, I wanted to memorize all those Bible verses. We were dragged off to church 4 and 5 times a week. I wanted to be good. I wanted them to like me. I wanted on Sunday morning when the minister issued the invitation and people started to come down to the front to get saved, I wanted to believe. I wanted to go down there and I could never do it. I couldn't find God. I got baptized in the Yellowstone River one March. Didn't find God, didn't find much anything for about 3 days after that, as I recall. Nippy. I had an uncle that went down there one Sunday morning and got saved. And they sent his butt to China to be a missionary, you know, and I, whoa! And sometimes I'd get it all together and I'd just begin to, and I'd memorize the Bible verses and I knew the books of the Bible and I'd do my homework and then I'd have a dirty thought in the middle of the afternoon and, you know, I just can't seem to sustain anything. Potential. You have so much potential. And I noticed something else. No matter what I got, no matter what event took place, there was never enough in it for me. Ever. Easter Sunday, people really made a thing out of Easter Sunday. And I never, ever could feel what they felt. Intellectually, I understood the story, the resurrection, the hope given to mankind. But I never felt any of it. Christmas, same thing. After the gifts had been opened up, my grandmother made us fold up the paper and put it away back in the drawer. That'll take the punch out of Christmas, huh? Now, those people must, I mean, for 3 months we've been talking about Christmas, and Christmas has come, and it is here, and it's Christmas night, and they're getting something out of it that I'm not, or else they're willing to put up with a lot less than I expected so much. My mother died when I was 14, and I stood at her grave and thought, there's something missing here. I don't feel what I should feel. And I always had that feeling. I heard it put into words, Peggy Lee, that song, Is That All There Is? when she was a little girl, her father took her to a circus, and after the circus is over, she kind of had the feeling that there ought to be more to it than that. There ought to be more to a love affair than that. There ought to be more to a marriage than that. There ought to be more to a career or a job. I mean, I want life to give me so much more. And the question in the song is that all there is? Is that it? And I had that question from the time I can remember. And it's astonishing to discover in Alcoholics Anonymous that is a spiritual question. I've always been spiritually hungry. Why would I want to go down there and get saved? The search was on from the time I was a little kid. I need something. And I went to church and I never got it there. I mean, the question was always there. If I can, and the reason I say it is a spiritual question is because if I could arbitrarily categorize my needs, just pigeonhole them somehow and say that I have emotional needs and I have physical needs and I have intellectual needs, and then set out to meet those needs, I could do that, and I have done it, and we do it. I've had many occasions I've had those needs met in my life, sometimes all at once. I'd be living with the right lady in the right house and have the right job and the right challenge, and all my physical needs would be met, and my emotional needs would be met, and my intellectual needs would be met. And I got to say, as has been said, and somebody referenced it today, there's got to be more. Is that all there is here on the lake? And it suggests to me, and I believe it's the case with me, that there is a bundle of needs in me that are neither emotional nor intellectual nor physical. And they have to do with my spirit. They have to do with some indefinable thing in me that's very, very insistent and never goes to sleep. A spiritual need. Is that all there is? You might as well keep on dancing and break out the booze in that song. I knew exactly what she was talking about. And that's been with me. And I had another thing as I was growing up, and that was an odd sense of shame. An odd sense of coming from a long way back. We didn't have any money when I grew up, and we moved a lot. And we were always going into neighborhoods. I went to 18 different schools before I got out of high school. Every time the rent was due, we were moving someplace. And I was ashamed of the homes that we lived in. I was ashamed of that car my father drove. I was ashamed of my brothers and sisters, and I was ashamed of my mother. And that bothered me. I was really ashamed of being ashamed of her. I knew that was tacky. I have an identical twin brother, and he took a healthier path than I did by far. I remember in the 8th grade, we moved into Denver, and we went to school that year on the right side of the tracks where they had some money. But we lived down by Cherry Creek where it was just a lower class neighborhood where people didn't have anything. And sometimes after football practice, we'd get a ride home with somebody's folks in their Cadillac or Chrysler. And I'd make them let me off 6 blocks from where we really lived, up on the hill a little bit, because I wanted them to think that we lived up there. I was glad to run 6 blocks to get home, just so they'd think we had lawn in front of our house. And if my brother was in the car, this identical twin brother of mine, he'd say, no, don't let us out here. It's down here about 6 blocks. And he'd let them get right in front of that house. And he'd say, that's it. No, the little dirty one behind there, that's the one. God, I'd die. Years went by, and I was sober sometime in AA, and he and I were talking, and I asked him, and he remembered. I said, didn't it bother you? Didn't it ever bother you to have those people see that little rat hole we lived in? You know what he said? He said, I never accepted the responsibility for the condition that place was in. You see how sick he is? He's just... And the reason I spent any time at all on that is because these problems were problems that had a solution. And I found it one night when I was about 17. Vodka and orange juice. And all of a sudden I didn't have to say, is that all there is? That's a wonderful thing to have. I remember that first drink, which may be a clue. I don't remember my first baked potato, but I remember that first drink. And from that day until I got to you people, I had an answer. It became a decreasingly dependable answer, but that answer took me from that time from the time I was 17 until I got to AA at age 29. And that was an answer. It was not a problem. That answer took me through 4 years of college, 2 years of dental school, 3 years in the Marine Corps, 2 marriages, and into that garage, and into the drunk tank, and into the Glendale Municipal Court. And one day, a bail bondsman said, I'm going to take you someplace. And I thought he was going to take... I worked for the guy. He was the one that gave me the job selling encyclopedias, and I was not seeing him in... I showed up in his office one day, and he said, where have you been? And I said, and he said, it's been a week. I said, I've been drunk. He said, for a week? I said, yeah. I knew he knew. And he said, God, Clint, I'm going to take you someplace today. And I thought he was going to take me back to jail. Or maybe to Camarillo, which is our laughing academy out there. Or maybe down to County Hospital. In those days, that wasn't bad. They were giving big jars of pills to guys like me on the theory, apparently, that alcoholism is a Valium deficiency problem. He put me in his car about noon that day with another guy, and they drove me across Glendale on a hot Wednesday, and we went around behind the laundry and up a long flight of stairs, hung on the side of that building and into a door and into a room, not near, of course, as big as this room, but in the back were some tables and chairs around them and about 12 people. And nothing in my life has been the same since that day. Nothing has been the same. That was in July of that year. And I had my last drunk on the 14th of August, but nothing has been the same since that day. Because I knew that you knew. I knew that. I knew that you had found an answer. I knew that, and the marvelous thing about that day is that you gave me hope. You were drunks that were not drunk. I was not yet teachable, and I couldn't take that answer for myself. But I stuck around there for 3 weeks, and then I was gone, and I got drunk, and I came back. On the 14th of August, 1966. I didn't know that was going to be the last time I'd drink. I had no idea. If you're new here and you're not sure that you've taken your last drink, how could you be sure? Well, you're in the right place. You just don't drink till midnight tonight. Just postpone one drink one day. If I'd have known that was going to be my last drink, I believe I'd have had two. Big ones. Right away I discovered something a little unsettling about the people in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know far more than you ought to know about me. I went up to a guy when I was 5 days sober after the Friday night meeting there in Glendale. I said, how do you get to sleep at night if you don't drink? I mean, how do you get to sleep at night? He was kind. He was a kind man, and he looked kind, and I risked that question with him. Because I'm not used to exposing any vulnerability to anybody. Pat talked about the willingness and the capacity last night to be vulnerable, and I don't want to be vulnerable. I don't want you to. I want to be cool. God, I was standing there, I remember, in a pair of Levi's and a T-shirt and tennis shoes and one sock, and I want to be cool. He said, do you really want to get to sleep tonight? And I said, yeah. He said, where do you live? And I said, I got a place down the street. I didn't tell him it was a garage. He said, do you live alone? And I said, yeah. He said, do you really want to sleep tonight? And I thought, oh, God. I was a little sorry I'd asked, right? I said, yeah. He said, well, I'll tell you for openers, make your bed. I said, what? Put clean sheets on your bed, Slim. Oh. Housekeeping hints, right? I get that from the Marine Corps. And how do you know about those sheets? And then he said, after you get the bed made, get into it and say a prayer to yourself. He even told me the prayer to say. If God be for us, who can be against us? Well, that's St. Paul. I never did like St. Paul. And now do-gooder here is going to run that past me. That won't work. I've been in clean beds before. I've said prayers before. I don't get to sleep. I lay there. I don't know about you, but I lay there and stare at the ceiling, and those old tapes that I have laying around in my head begin to play. And that lie I told that gal in Norfolk, and the silly story that I told my commanding officer, and that awful mess at dental school, and that silliness in Tijuana, and the child support, and the wives, all of it begins to run, and I don't sleep at all. I know it won't work. I've gone to bed in clean beds before. I've said prayers before. We used to say one every night when I was a kid. Doesn't help you get sleep. We said one, now I lay me down to sleep. There's one. You get to that part about if I should die before I wake, that'll keep you awake a while, just, working through that. But I found out something interesting here. What I do can change how I feel. He didn't ask me if I wanted to make my bed or say a prayer. He just told me to do that if I wanted to sleep. And I went home that night to my little garage, and I was annoyed with him, that old fool, giving me that nickel and dime answer. But there was two things I couldn't get out of my mind. He looked kind, and he knew about those sheets. The psychiatrist had never mentioned the sheets. The chaplain didn't bring it up. I had had a bad run of sheets that spring. Several mattresses had failed me, as I recall, too. They did get a little gamey in that little room. I don't know where I found them, but I found some sheets in a drawer someplace and put them on that bed. Turned out the light. Now I have a decision to make, right? I don't want to say that prayer. But I didn't want to lay awake until 3 and 4 in the morning either. I didn't have anywhere to go and anything to do except go out and get a bottle, and I didn't want to do that because I knew exactly how that would turn out. I would get back to the room with the bottle, and I would drink it, and I would go to sleep, and I would wake up at 4 in the morning. Maybe on the floor, maybe staring at a rat in the corner. And so I made the bed, and I got in it, and I said that stupid prayer that old buzzard told me to say. And I knew it wouldn't work. And the next thing I knew, it was 7 in the morning, and I'd slept all night long, and I hadn't slept like that in a year. I wasn't passed out or blacked out. I didn't jerk and snap around. I didn't have nightmares. I didn't sweat. I slept. Not a big deal, except it was an important turning point. I don't make sharp turns. I just make little turns. There's a little pivot point here. Sometimes I do it without knowing it, and I look back and I say, oh, that seemed to be a little course correction there. It's an interesting thing that I can change how I feel and how I think simply by changing my conduct. In fact, that concept has saved my life because I can't change how I think and how I feel by working directly on those problems, but I can change how I act. I had to come face to face with that a couple of years later. I went to my sponsor. Now I got a sponsor. And I went to him because I have a problem, and the problem is I hate my ex-wife. I really don't like that lady. At all. I mean, I'd be driving down the freeway, and the thought of her would come into my mind, and I like fantasy land anyway, and I'd get into a thing, an imaginary conversation. It takes a little work because you have to set the stage and put everybody in costume and invent dialogue, and they sometimes come on and you have to send them back off. And there she'd be, and I'll say this, and she'll say that, and then I'll say this, and she'll say that. And I'll say, I'm going to smack her. And I'd be 3 off-ramps past where I wanted to go. Really absorbed with that lady. I had, as we say, a rich reality in those days. So I go to my sponsor, and my problem is I can't stand my ex-wife. And he gave me a few minutes on that, and then he asked me a question that really was so far the mark that I was surprised he was bothering with it. He said, how you doing with that child support payment? I'll get to that when she shapes up, is what I'll do. And he told me again, if you want to change how you feel about somebody, you have to change how you treat them. See, I'd send that money, but I'd send it a week late, or I'd send half of it, or I'd go by there and give it to her in person and tell her how to spend it. Oh, I was cute with that money. And he told me that had to stop. He told me that I had to send that money right off the top every payday, and he made it clear he didn't care whether I wanted to send it or not. And if I couldn't get it over there, he informed me that I could look around for another sponsor. In those days, I didn't have a checking account. I did it with money orders. I tell you what happened was that when I was 5 months sober, I went back to jail for a day for checks I'd written while I was drinking. I was not too quick to leap into the breach and pick those babies up. And so a warrant had issued, and I went down there to put that fire out, and they kept me. So I was on 3 years probation, and I was real nervous about a checking account. I had the feeling if I bounce one check, they're going to be on me. So I did it with money orders. I go to the bank every payday with a list of money orders. God, they hated to see me coming. They were nice. They'd do it. Once in a while, one of them would say, Mr. Hodges, if you get a checking account, it only costs you a dime to write a check. We have to charge you 40 cents for these money orders. And I'd say, yeah, I know. Or if she was being real shrill, I'd say, when I write a check, it costs me about 4 days in jail and a couple $100. And they get busy on those money. I'd add one more money order to my little list every payday. And I did it. I didn't want to do it, but I did it. And the first clue I had that something was changing was about 2 or 3 months later, 3 months maybe. And I'm driving down the freeway, and I'm with the guy, and he's in my car, and he's screaming about his ex-wife. She's a bad mother. I don't know if she's a bad mother or not, but I listened to him, got in that bag with him for a while. And out of nowhere came the thought that my ex-wife is a good mother. She may be a big stinker in every other area of her life, and I may never like that lady, but she is a good mother to our son. And it's the first positive thought I'd had about her in I don't know how many years, and the only thing that had changed was that I was paying child support. She hadn't suddenly shaped up as a mother. My perception of that whole thing was drifting slowly. Toward the end of that year, it was 1968, she called me up beginning of December and said she needed the money a little early, Christmas. Could I bring it over? And I'll be damned if I didn't find myself going out there a week early with that money just because she needed it. And that's not like me. I've never been what you call a compulsive child support payer. And the wonderful thing about it was the payoff. I hope I never forget that day, because I went out there early in December in 1968 to hand a lady an envelope with some cash in it. We didn't talk money. I just gave her the envelope and spent a little time with my kid talking about whatever we were going to do that weekend. And I left. It was a brisk December evening. They'd already started to put up some of the Christmas stuff. One of those sunsets out there in Santa Monica near the Pacific Ocean. And I was walking down the stairs from her apartment, and somebody's playing Christmas music, and I felt more like a man than I had ever felt in my life. And there's just no way for me to buy that feeling. And the only thing that had happened was that I was meeting a responsibility courteously. Now, you'd think the payoff is way too big. I mean, that's way out of proportion. Everybody in California is paying child support every week or month. And I pay it, and I get all those benefits. It's incredible. This program is so much... It really, I started to say it's more than stopping drinking, and it isn't even about stopping drinking. It's about learning to live in such a way that I don't have to get started again. And there's no way that I can go any period of time without drinking anymore, and yet I have learned to live in such a way here that I don't have to drink anymore. And we were talking about it earlier, there's a story about a guy that lived in a fishing village in Alaska. And he stayed alive by going from one fisherman to the next. At the end of the day, he'd pick a different boat, and he'd go up there, give me a piece of fish. And the skipper would give him a piece of fish. And he'd scuttle off someplace, and he'd cook his fish, and he'd eat it, and that's how he made it. And the arrangement seemed to make everybody happy, except one day he goes up to a guy and says, give me a piece of fish. And the guy didn't know the rules. And he said, I can't. I can't. I'll teach you how to fish. I'll bring you aboard and take you out and teach you how to fish so you never have to ask anybody again for a piece of fish, but it's not in me to give you a piece of fish. And the guy said, I don't want to bother you. I don't want to get in the way. Just give me a piece of fish. You're just like me. And the guy said, I can't. I really can't. It would be easy. I almost wish I could. And I can't. And that's exactly the attitude that I had when I came to AA, and for some time thereafter I would say, don't make me write an inventory. Give me a piece of fish. I don't want to go to a meeting every night. Give me a piece of fish. List my telephone number in my right name? I don't think so. Where does it say that? They say that may be as close to step 3 as you ever get, Slim. Give me a piece of fish. No, we'll teach you how to fish. No, you don't understand. I don't want to bother you. I just kind of hang around a while and you give me whatever you can and I'll be on my way. Give me a piece of fish. And I got real lucky because I fell in with a group of bandits out there in West Los Angeles that refused to give me any fish. They refused. They said, we'll teach you how to fish, but you don't get any fish. We won't give you a piece of fish. The trap that you'd set for yourself if we gave you a piece of fish is that it would be gone in no time. If you learn how to fish, you'll always know. It'll be yours. That's one of the great things about this program. We come in here and all of us look around for a while for somebody to take these steps for us. God, if I could just find somebody that'll take these steps for me. And if she'll let me sleep on her couch for the time being, that'd be better too. But the thing is that if I take them myself, nobody on this earth can take them away from me. See, the thing that happens then is that I change. I change. And nobody can take that away from me, and I got to change. I got to do something about that guy that came in here drunk in 1966, because that guy will drink again. I found out one day that it's safe to take step 3. That's an odd thing. I was so afraid. I don't want to turn my will and my life over to the care of God. He'll send me to China too. But we do, eventually we do. And I kneel down by a bed in Santa Monica in my apartment one day. Really, I do it out of pain. I do it because I don't have any place else to go. I find myself on my knees. And I turn my will and my life over to the care of God. I haven't left it there every moment since that time, but there it was for a time, for maybe a couple of weeks. Just long enough for me to know that that's a safe thing for me to do. It is safe for me to turn my will and my life over there. He didn't want me in China. He wanted me to stay in Santa Monica and pay child support, No big deal. Is that all there is? Yeah. That's it. As long as I have my hand out saying, gimme, that's it. That's all there is, and Peggy Lee is right. The wonderful thing about Alcoholics Anonymous is that I have an opportunity here to put some back. If I'm given and not taken, I don't have to say, is that all there is? I never have had that terrible emptiness going home from a 12-step call. Never have I had that feeling of, is that all there is, after having been involved in giving of myself to anybody or anything. And the opportunities for me to give of myself in Alcoholics Anonymous are all around me. And so I don't have to say, unless I choose to start taking again, I don't have to say, is that all there is? Even that old puzzle about potential seemed to sort itself out. It's funny, I always thought that gap closed by somehow really getting my act together and finally living up here where I ought to, and it doesn't at all. I mean, I always thought I was a social drinker. I just got to stay out of that beer bar. It's the only reason I seem to look like an alcoholic. And next time I'll remember to eat, and I'm going to run with a different crowd, and I'm going to not take any downers with it. and I'll be okay. Heard a guy one night say he'd been convinced by somebody next to him on a bar stool that he'd been a victim of bad ice for 15 years. That gap closed the day that I came to you people. Really, a couple of weeks later, it closed. I'm an alcoholic. Now, you can't tell me from a normal person very often anymore, because I don't drink. I'm really an honest person. Oh, I tell a white lie occasionally. Well, I'm a liar is what I am. Now, do I want to do something about that or not? If I do, I can change that, but it all starts, I got to play that ball where it lies, they say on the pro golf circuit. If that baby's in a sand trap, I love to stand on the green and look cute, right? And nothing happens until I'm willing to admit the ball's over there in the sand trap. And it's surprising that it's easy to get it moving again if I walk over there. But as long as I want to look cool, I'm in a lot of trouble. But that gap closes, and life is available. It works. It really does. If my mama was here tonight, she'd say, what will you do when you meet your Maker? And I guess I could say we got together with those guys in AA, and I worked those steps, and I made those amends, and I started to live a better life. I'll tell him that. I could say a lot of things if my mom said, what will you do when you meet your Maker? But the precise answer, the answer that I love, the one that's made such a tremendous difference in my life, is that I could say, Ma, we already met. I meet him every day. Those guys in that club in Glendale introduced us. I roll out on that freeway these days in the morning heading up to the office. I had a chance to go back to school. I practice law today in California. And I do things every day that are beyond my capacity to do. And sometimes I get scared because I think I have to do them alone. And I never do. And I ask for help, and I ask for it with the expectancy of getting it, and I get it if I ask. I have to ask every day. I didn't like that for a long time. This day our daily bread we get. But I did meet God when I found you. I didn't know that for a while. He really does hold me in the hollow of his hand, and I can't fall out. I can climb out, but I can't fall out. All I have to do is take off my pack and relax and be here with you, and everything is okay. All I have to do is stay in the middle of Alcoholics Anonymous and try to be of service to the people around me and try to pay some attention to someone other than me. And I don't have to say, is that all there is? I don't have to worry about potential. I don't have to worry what I'll do when I meet my Maker. It works. It really does. Thank you.